Welcome to the MLB Pitcher Nail Down. I'm Jason Gilbo, JGilbo11. With me is Nick Tasso at the Inefficient 2. Taking a look at tonight's 13-game slate, and we got ourselves a Coors game going on, so always have to kind of take that into consideration. But overall, there's a lot of top arms that you can definitely look at tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of different pricing on both the sites with guys like Kluber being so drastically priced, and it just on DraftKings, I think he's kind of unplayable, but on FanDuel, he's definitely in play. It's just one of those things you got to take it site by site and just see what fits with your lineup.
Yeah, definitely. I think kind of more so today. We've seen that pretty heavily. Jumping right into things, Tigers and Nationals here, 7.5 over/under. Anibal Sanchez, Steven Strasburg. This one, Strasburg definitely playable in GPPs for me. I think he's an interesting swerve off of Lester. Kind of who I expect to be kind of the top option out of those price tier guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like Strasburg. I think I like him a little more than you. I know the Tigers have really turned it on recently, but they're still up there in strikeout percentage, and Strasburg's just been extremely consistent all season. He's kind of looked like what we've all expected him over the years. And going back to the Tigers, they're striking out over the past 2 weeks, nearly 23%. So that definitely bodes well for Steven Strasburg tonight.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And what about Sanchez on the other side? I mean, you look at this Nationals team, and the Cubs kind of put in a blueprint of you walk Bryce Harper every time he comes up to the plate, and you just pitch to the rest of this lineup because outside of him and Murphy, it's awful.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Sanchez, and the last 2 starts have been pretty solid for him, but he just scares me because he's able to really give up the walks, and if he has runners on base, he gives up home runs here or there. It's just it could basically go really bad pretty quickly. And although you look at the Nationals, and like we saw yesterday with just walk Bryce Harper every single at bat, they're kind of punchless. So. But they did kind of get to Arrieta in the first few innings, I believe. So there is that. I mean, I'm probably staying away from him. I mean, maybe in a few GPPs, but I don't like his price either.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. You never feel good about it locking him in just because, as you mentioned, the walks are insane. He just has those one innings where he just looks completely different from how he is the rest of that game. But I'm with you. I think for the most part, I'm staying away from Sanchez there.
Yeah, I mean, you even go back to his no-hitter day in Florida, and he had so many walks in that start, and it's just you never know what you're going to get with him, to be honest with you.
Yeah, definitely. Next one here, you got Royals and Yankees, Chris Young versus Ivan Nova. Over/under of 8.5, New York, -122 favorites. I think this one's set up for a recipe for disaster on both sides as far as pitching goes. Both struggle with left-handers. It's in Yankee Stadium against – yes, the Yankees lineup hasn't been great. Yes, the Royals lineup hasn't been great. But overall, I think this is where both teams kind of take advantage of those weak arms on the hill.
Yeah, you look at Chris Young, and he's been saved a little bit this year for playing in Kauffman Stadium, but he's given up at least one home run every start. So I'm completely staying away from him. He can't get ground balls, and it's just a weird thing that he's still this old, still pitching somewhat effectively. And then on the other side, Nova, I have no real idea what to expect from him, just innings wise, because he hasn't really been stretched out at all this year. He's been out of the bullpen, and he's just replacing CC. So he could go 4, he could go 5, and he could go 6. Who really knows? But it's just something I don't really want to take a risk here.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you. Next one here, you got Pirates and Reds, John Neese versus Dan Straley. Over/under of 9. I think that's a pretty strong indicator that you're staying away. I mean, I know Straley's been, had his moments just because he's so cheap. He might pay off the price tag, but it's never enough to really kind of put you into consideration for anything major.
Yeah, this is another game I'm skipping. It is interesting, though, to see on DraftKings, at least, all the Pirates bats be priced so high just because they're going up against Dan Straley, who actually hasn't been bad this year. But if I have to take him on my fantasy team, I'm definitely not going to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that was something that we talked about in the breakdown pods was FanDuel. You kind of like the Pirates bats, but, down there on DK, they're priced, identical to Coors. So
they're even higher than Coors.
Yeah, I mean, they're in that same tier where it just makes them kind of a complete swerve.
Yeah, silly pricing.
Yeah. Next game here, we have the Brewers and Marlins. Willie Peralta versus Jose Fernandez. Miami Monster minus 240 favorites. Um, you obviously got to like Fernandez in this spot against the Brewers. I know Fernandez hasn't quite been as consistent as we'd like. I think he's more of a GPP swerve tonight. Still, I kind of like him along the same lines of Strasburg, just because Lester is by far my cash game option. But I mean, he's in a great spot. I think this Brewers team, yes, they've had some success so far, but still a pretty high strikeout rate, 25% against right-handers so far to start the year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just think he's been a little bit too inconsistent for me. And you just nailed it on the head. If you're going to pay for Fernandez, you might as well just pay the couple $100 more for Strasburg. So it's kind of where I'm at if I'm going to do two really good starting pitchers on DraftKings, or if I'm just going to go with one, I'm probably going to be Strasburg.
Yeah, definitely. And Willie Peralta, I mean, our
he got,
usual take.
yeah, he got the win last time, right? But
Yeah,
he won 5 innings, gave up 13 hits, and against the same team. Park's a little bit different, but I don't think anything good's going to come out of this one.
no, definitely not. Next one here, you got A's and Red Sox. Clay Buchholz taking on Sonny Gray, 8.5 over under. Boston minus 134 favorites. I think the one thing that kind of jumped out to a lot of people was Sonny Gray's price tag on DraftKings at 6,800. You look at this Red Sox team. I mean, right now top three in WOBA. They don't strike out a ton. The power's been there. We've seen it recently. I mean, Pedroia's been heating up. Ortiz has been continuously crushing the ball. So, I mean, the pricing is because Sonny Gray has that name recognition. But I guess you can say he's still pretty cheap. He's still in a guy who I don't think is in a good spot anyway, regardless of the price tag.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the price tag jumps out a lot on DraftKings, and it makes you almost want to play him just because, like you said, name recognition. But he's got a lot of things going against him. You got Fenway Park, and like you said, the Red Sox bats are even starting to get hot right now. I know they played the late game last night, but that ended pretty quickly. So I think they're all kind of rested for today.
Yeah, definitely. And on that other side, Clay Buchholz is someone who I will take chances on every now and then. I probably do it more so than I actually should. But tonight is not a night I'm going to do that just because, one, the A's don't strike out a ton. He hasn't looked great, especially against left-handers, which this A's team just has a ton of.
Yeah, I agree with you. He's some guy, even though he is pretty cheap, I'm just staying away. Like you said, a lot of lefties in that lineup, and you never know which Buchholz you're going to get. And he's almost every start besides two, I believe, this year, he's looked absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, I mean, he's coming off a strong start, obviously, against the White Sox, but overall, I still think you're not going to get much out of him.
Yeah, and you look at the White Sox, they're a pretty righty-handed offensive team, and a lot of their big guys are all struggling down in the low 200s. So I really don't put a lot of stock into that outing.
Yeah, definitely. This next one, White Sox and Rangers, Miguel Gonzalez, Colby Lewis, 9.5 over under. I mean, this is essentially a game that's a couple less than Coors right there in Texas, and I don't like either of these arms. I'm heading on both sides for offense tonight. It's just kind of an easy stay away.
Yeah, I think the only guy I could be talking to is probably Colby Lewis in GPPs, just because you look at this White Sox lineup, and they're, like I just said, they're all righties basically, and I think he's pitched pretty well. Colby Lewis does have a little issue pitching at his home park. He gives up a decent amount of home runs, but his last few starts haven't been too bad. So definitely not viable for cash, but I could potentially use him in maybe GPPs.
Just because you're kind of maybe looking to pay down at that SP2 spot.
Yeah, he wouldn't be my anchor of my team, and on FanDuel, I don't trust him. But definitely, if you need to save some salary in the SP2, I don't mind him. I'm not a huge fan of him, but I think this White Sox team, they just kind of struggle, especially against righties. So it's worth a shot, but it is Globe Life Park, and he's been pretty bad there.
Yeah, definitely. This next one here, Cubs and Padres, John Lester, minus 237. Favorite, 7.5 over under. By far my favorite option. He's been the more consistent guy out of that top tier. Still priced below Kluber on DraftKings, so you got to like that. I just think, I mean, look at this Padres team. there's no other way around it. Lester comes in, gets a win, and pitches a quality start. I mean, it just seems like the safest option on the board.
Yeah, and I was looking at all the splits for the teams this year, and like every time you change the week or the day or whatever, San Diego still is number one in strikeout percentage. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here for Lester to really rack up the Ks. He will give up base runners here and there, but he's been really consistent this year. And it's at the Cubs Wrigley Field. It's not the best for pitchers, but he's pitched pretty well there so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, you look at every start but one, he's allowed just one earned or less. I mean, his highest earned run was in or home against Cincinnati, where he allowed three. So, I mean, you want to talk about consistency? He's absolutely delivering it.
Yeah, and I don't mind his price. I know it's kind of up there, right around Strasburg, but I think he's kind of worth it. You just look at this Padres offense, and it's really bad. Every third guy strikes out, and it's not good.
Yeah, definitely. He's by far the one of the top options tonight. And in this next, no, not this next one. Orioles and Twins. Tyler Wilson, Jose Barrios, 8.5 over under. The only thing these guys can possibly bring to the table is salary relief, but I'm not necessarily sold on them. Barrios, I mean, I guess you can argue may have some strikeout upside here, but he also relatively low sample size, has struggled up with the long ball so far in the majors. But this Orioles team, red hot offensively, I'm kind of staying away.
Yeah, absolutely. This is definitely a stay away game for me. I know it's in the Twins Park, which is pretty favorable to pitchers, or kind of in the road, middle of the road, but it's just I really don't have much hope for either of these starters. If I did have to pick one, I agree with you. Barrios probably would be the guy, get some salary relief, and who knows, he could rack up a decent amount of Ks again.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I know, I mean, you're kind of looking at that line he threw against Houston. If he, I think that's kind of actually a decent ceiling for him in this matchup. But of course, there's a ton of risk there.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Orioles offense, and they could kind of get going almost with anyone there. I know they've had a decent amount of injuries, but they're still pretty good.
Yeah, definitely. This next one here, Indians and Astros, Corey Kluber, Mike Fiers, over under of 8. Cleveland just minus 108 favorites. I think that's a little concerning for me for a guy like Kluber being on the hill. I don't know. I kind of odd.
Yeah, I agree with you. You think he'd be have a higher Vegas total right there, hoping that he'd get the win. But I don't know. It's just one of those things. I think they really rank the Houston offense pretty high. But at the same time, you look at the Houston's offense, and they can strike out almost every batter. So it's a really good matchup for Kluber. But like we talked about earlier, don't really can fit him on DraftKings. He's just too expensive. But on FanDuel, he's priced pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, Astros 26.7% strikeout rate so far this season against righties. I mean, there are a couple things obviously going up against Kluber, which I don't think it can justify that 13K tag, just being in Minute Maid and also not having a win beat for sure. I mean, those are kind of two things that to take into consideration why he's just kind of a FanDuel only play.
Yeah, looking at the salaries, I don't understand why he's 13. If I had to pick, I'd probably put Lester and Strasburg above him, and possibly in the 12,800, 13,000 range. But it is what it is, and it's just unfortunately because it is a good matchup for him on DraftKings. And say if he was 11,000, you could also fit in someone else, but you just can't. On FanDuel, though, like we stated, he's priced pretty good, and there's a lot of upside there, especially with FanDuel's new scoring or whatever they're doing now.
Yeah, definitely. Does Fiers interest you before we move on at all? I mean, I probably know the answer.
Not really. If this was a month ago and they had guys, I don't even remember their name, Holt or whatever, playing the outfield and just random guys that you never heard of, then maybe. But he's way too risky, especially with Brantley back. Kipnis is heating up, and this is a hard or easy fade for me.
Yeah, definitely. This next one here at Coors. Do we just hit the fast forward button and move on through this one?
If you'd like, that would definitely save time.
Yeah.
But I mean, we should just let everyone know Tyler Chatwood against Archie Bradley. And although Chatwood has looked good his last two starts, they've both been on the road. .33 road ERA. So it's a completely different once you get at Coors Field.
Yeah, I mean, obviously 2 starts at home, 7.20 ERA, 0.33 on the road. So he might be a guy we might be coming up and talking about soon when he gets outside in Coors.
Yeah, I mean, he's looked good. It's just it makes no sense to do it. I mean, we've seen some good performances at Coors, I believe, by Bettis and even Medea. Is that how you say his name? I don't know.
Kenta Maeda.
Yeah, I call him Medea.
Yeah.
It's just easier for me to remember.
And
But
Samardzija had a nice outing.
Yeah, so I mean, they're there to be had, but it doesn't make sense.
It's like seeing a unicorn at this point, just seeing good pitching performances in Coors.
But it's happened probably more times this year than it did last year already. So
yeah, that is true.
Weird thing. But then I feel like we've had big blow up games at Coors more so than we've had in last year.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we were kind of frustrated at times going back to last season at Coors.
Because you would wait for it to come and you'd have the great lineups, and it just didn't happen for most of the season. I want to say probably at second half it really picked up, but first half was kind of just throwing money down the drain.
Yeah, definitely. This next one here, breaking into 10 o'clock games, Rays and Mariners, Matt Moore versus Felix Hernandez. Over under a 7, Seattle -125 favorites. Hernandez, I think, is a guy who, yes, there's some red flags in his game, but I also do believe he has a decent upside here for GPPs. Just going up against this Braves team that isn't great against right-handed pitching, 27% strikeout rate. So I think there is decent upside here for King Felix.
Absolutely. You look at that strikeout rate by the Rays, and you really have to like that. And it's at Safeco. His home park. He loves pitching there, so it's kind of basically all coming into like a good game for him. You look at the Rays; they have a bunch of righties, a couple lefties who could kind of do some damage, but that's far and few between. And I think Hernandez has just pitched so well so far this year. I know he's had some rough outings, but he's still the same old Hernandez of years past.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the hard ball percent; it's pretty low. His K percentage isn't high as it used to be, but I still think he is a guy who can dial him up, and I think tonight's matchup is in a spot where he can definitely do that.
Yeah, I actually don't mind Matt Moore in this matchup. I think he will be hindered a little bit because I bet you they throw in a bunch of righties into this lineup. But if they have to throw some lefties out there, I think he could have a nice little outing. I know he had a rough outing last time out, which will scare ownership away, which would also benefit him in GPPs.
Yeah, I mean, that Seattle offense isn't really intimidating, especially against lefties. As you mentioned, there's going to be guys that come in. Franklin Gutierrez is the only name that kind of is honorable mention there. But overall, I mean, Mariners 19th in WOBA, 21% strikeout rate. We've seen Moore be, fairly solid and in Safeco tonight. I definitely don't mind him at his price tags.
Yeah, and even going on Franklin Gutierrez, he hasn't, from last time I checked, he hasn't been that good against lefties this year. I know it's a small sample size, but he just hasn't been the same old lock him in kind of guy like Ryan Rayburn is against lefties. So I don't know. I just think Matt Moore might have a decent under the radar performance.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I mean, if the Rays can get maybe a couple runs off of them, I don't think – because, I mean, the line here just -125. It's not really a tremendous in one favor.
Yeah, and they have a lot of strikeout potential too, the Mariners. Did you see what's going on with Nelson Cruz? I know he was kind of injured, but I might be making –
if he's out of the lineup, that's a huge bump to Moore for me.
Yeah, I mean, I saw something. Let me pull it up right now.
If he's out, I mean, he's kind of the only lefty matcher they got going on right now.
And he's had a bad season so far anyways. Nelson Cruz, it said he didn't start yesterday and he has a right forearm bruise, but I don't know any other info on that. So that's something to keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a bump if he sits.
Yeah.
Next game here, we got Mets and Dodgers, Steven Matz versus Scott Kazmir. Over under a 7. I'm more on the Mets side here, going up against this Dodgers offense that, middle of the road against lefties. They throw in a lot of platoon guys like Thompson and Hernandez into the lineup. So you do get some more right-handed bats. But overall, Matz is a guy who who I like in tournaments tonight, who's a little bit cheaper than kind of the guys we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have Matz as my starting pitcher too for DraftKings tonight. I just think he's been really good. He had that huge blow up game, his first
First,
start of the season, and he's won 4 straight games, ERA under 1, and he's just looked really good. And then you take a look at the Dodgers lineup, and you have Utley, Seager. You also have Adrian Gonzalez, all lefties who are basically the most important part of their lineup, and they're kind of going to be neutralized tonight if Matz is on his game. And I know you'll see Hernandez in there, who's Trace Thompson possibly too. But I just think if he can navigate around those few righties in there, he should have a pretty good night.
yeah, definitely. And I think I'm looking at him to pick up a win. I know it's basically a pick 'em. Scott Kazmir coming off a strong start, but overall, I still think the Mets aren't great against left-handers. But overall, I think they should be in a spot to give Matt some run support.
Yeah, absolutely. Kazmir really hasn't been the best Kazmir that we've seen over his career, but he's still decent. But this Mets offense, I think, should be able to hit him around at least a little bit. I know they are also lefty heavy with Granderson and Conforto, Duda, but at the end of the day, I think Mats is going to overcome this one.
Yeah, definitely. And Dude is a guy who has hit lefties pretty well despite the lefty-lefty matchup there.
Yeah, and they still have Cespedes hidden in the middle of that, so it's a good lefty-righty matchup for him.
Yeah, definitely. This last game of the night here, Blue Jays and Giants, Aaron Sanchez versus Jake Peavy. Over-under of 8, Toronto minus 108 favorites. Sanchez is a guy in a different spot. I'd be fine with it just because the Giants don't strike out a ton. I like the big ballpark there for Sanchez. But overall, I just think there are far better options at that price tag with more upside.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of those fade kind of games for me. Sanchez has pitched well this year, but I don't know. I'm not sure if this is the real Aaron Sanchez we've seen so far. He's still kind of young in his career, and we're just still waiting to see how he develops.
Yeah, and I think, he's kind of toned down on it a little bit to the lefties, which has always been kind of his big problem. But so far this year, it's still around the average. It's like 328, I believe, to left-handed bats.
Yeah,
so
329 or something like that. But
yeah,
not too many lefties in this Giants lineup once you get past like Belt, Crawford, and Panic, and Pagan's still hurt too. So they've been throwing some really random lineups out there with Mac Williamson, Kelby Tomlinson, both righties. So I think Sanchez, he's in a good spot here, but it's just I'm kind of staying away.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing, I don't think necessarily the strikeouts are going to be there, which is kind of why, even if he gives up 2 or 3 earned runs, at least he had that in previous matchups to kind of back him up. So looks like he dropped out, but we're wrapping up here with the pitcher nail down. Be sure to check out DaveFantasyCafe.com for all our great tools and content.